Hey guys, it's SGT here. I'm always excited to have the very talented writer and economist Jeff Nielson on the line from BullionBullsCanada.com. Jeff always provides interesting topics for us to discuss, and there's a lot to discuss this time, so let's get started. Welcome back, Jeff.
It's a pleasure to be back again.
Now, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the CFTC 4-1 vote, in which the CFTC appears to have stood down on behalf of allowing J.P. Morgan to continue its paper manipulation of the silver markets. Can you tell me your take on that?
Well, I never held out much in the way of hopes for the CFTC because it certainly seemed to be a totally captive regulatory agency for the last several years now. I adopted a wait-and-see attitude when I, heard Ted Butler, sort of hold out some high hopes that there might be some positive action taken.
And so did Harvey Organ, too. Harvey Organ was really enthusiastic.
Well, the thing is, I've sort of waffled on this issue myself, and at one point I was referring to this as a good cop, bad cop scenario, and then I was, getting a little bit more bullish when, Ted Butler and Harvey Organ became more optimistic about things. And, now I'm sort of moving back towards, that this may have all just been a dog and pony show. Nothing more than a stalling tactic to delay a progression that, the bankers know is occurring and want to continue to see progress.
And my take on it has been, for the folks that subscribe to my channel, that it doesn't matter. I mean, it really does not matter. It's an inconsequential vote to the degree that, if anything, it just gives us all more time to potentially acquire silver at these suppressed prices. But this suppression absolutely, positively cannot last forever, and it will end, and it will probably end badly, correct?
Well, on the one hand, I say the same thing to our own readers. Think like the big buyers. Look at this stalling tactic as providing a buying opportunity for you to continue to acquire cheap bullion. I basically think that this is becoming, simply a script that is being played out, and it is definitely leading to a horrible ending. I'm getting more worried about these events as they progress because if there's at least not some cosmetic attempts to restore some sort of order to this market, then it's hard to see how things can last much longer before, there is some major event.
And in a major event, would that be a COMEX default or an LBMA default?
Well, for silver, a default is the most likely result because of the fact that there's such a high degree of industrial demand. And, of course, unlike the gold market where they can, basically buy off investors with their quote-unquote cash settlements, that doesn't work with respect to silver consumers who are needing this silver industrially because, they have to have the real thing or their businesses closed down. So a formal default is much more likely in the silver market than the gold market. With the gold market, we could have various types of watershed events. For instance, a decoupling of paper gold from, real physical bullion. But, I've been doing some recent reading and research, and now I'm kind of having some second thoughts on how exactly that ending is going to play out.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that. Now, you had mentioned an article called "The Silver Stealers" by Charles Savoy, and in that article he talks about a group called the Pilgrims, and I'm extremely intrigued because my research has led me to believe that this is all being done by design, and as nefarious as the plot may be to suppress silver and gold, and as out of control as this manipulation may have gotten by J.P. Morgan, perhaps this has all been done by design over many, many decades. Can you tell me a little bit more about your take on that and Charles Savoy's article?
Well, I'm still learning this material myself, but just to provide, the most basic of overviews for your own audience, I'm sure most of these people have heard of the Skull and Bone Society, the sort of legendary cabal of the wealthy.
Absolutely. John Kerry was a member. George Bush was a member.
Well, in fact, Charles Savoy has introduced me to a group, a cabal, which precedes this, and which in fact appears to be bigger and more meaningful and more real in every sense of the word. And they're called the Pilgrims. And according to Savoy, they've been extremely active around the world in manipulating all sorts of global events, and we're not just talking about recent history. We're talking about something that went back centuries, even before this actual group became officially came into being. And I'm really starting to have some second thoughts myself as to whether the current progression of bullion markets is more or less the result of a culmination of manipulation and the accidental consequences from that manipulation, or whether this is more of a deliberate long-term plan, and all of these various steps have been, seen in advance.
Okay, so let's jump to the chase. So if the bankers wanted to destroy physical gold and silver and remove it from the everyday experience of the common man and get us onto their paper system so that then they have total control, is that kind of what you're saying? Did the Pilgrims play a role in deliberately getting us away from our constitutional money?
Well, in fact, this seems to be one of the primary obsessions of this group, is to separate ordinary people from precious metals, because, of course, as you tell your audience, as I tell my audience, precious metals is the only vessel for storing wealth, which is beyond the capacity of the wealthy in general and the bankers in particular.
Yeah, they can't print it.
Yeah, and so simply detaching people from precious metals has been a long-term obsession, if nothing else. And of course, in that respect, if you merely want to get something out of somebody else's possession, then it doesn't matter whether you actually take possession yourself or whether you destroy it. And so, what we seem to be seeing in terms of the unfolding of events is a two-pronged approach. With respect to gold, this Pilgrims group appears to be more interested in trying to accumulate it themselves, which makes sense, given that gold is a more expensive metal, and of course they have these vast hoards of wealth. With respect to silver, the approach seems to be quite opposite, in that they seem to be more interested in destroying the silver supply and really not being too concerned as to whether they, were able to accumulate vast amounts of it or not, because silver is, of course, more the metal of the common man, since it's much less expensive than gold. And, regarding this Charles Savoy stuff, this is stuff that hasn't even made it into the broader precious metals sector, let alone anywhere near the mainstream news. For instance, what they did to destroy the silver market in the 30s, and what basically ended up leading to the Great Depression, or 20s and early 30s and World War II, is the British basically went into India and confiscated as much silver as they could get their hands on, and then went and dumped that all into the global market. And so, you can imagine, given the bullion holdings in India, if you go about getting your hands on as much bullion as you can, you've got a pretty huge stash of it. And of course, when they dumped all that bullion into the global market, not only did it kill India's economy, but it destroyed China's economy, because China was on a silver standard. And so they dump all this silver onto the global market, take the value of silver down to next to nothing, and then, of course, all of a sudden, China's money is worth nothing. That's the same thing as saying that they have immediately inflation of 50%, 100% per year, sort of thing. It almost created hyperinflation in China by themselves. Eventually, it ruined China's economy and forced them to go off the silver standard. And of course, that was sort of a major operation. Then they have all these minor operations in smaller countries where they're, like Philippines and that, where these other lesser countries used to have their own silver standards, and it was all a matter of sabotage, pressure. And so, I'm sure you must have wondered at some point, how did we go from a world where all currencies were backed by precious metals to one where none was backed? And it wasn't like it happened all at once. There was these, various attacks that these pilgrims made around the world in various forms to get the entire world off of precious metals.
That's so interesting, because you do wonder how we got to this point. And, you can, my research, you uncover a stone, and usually down there with the cockroaches and the worms, you're going to find the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds. And I wonder what connections the Pilgrims had to the Rothschilds.
Yeah, it's definitely part of it. Rockefeller gets mentioned over and over and over. Rothschild gets mentioned over and over and over. All of the big, houses of Europe and eventually North America are listed here. You won't find a name missing.
Interesting. Well, we're going to link to that article, The Silver Stealers by Charles Savoy. It'll be below this video, so people will definitely want to dig into that. That's extremely compelling information.
This concludes The Silver Stealers. Click here for the death of the dollar and bullion confiscation.